Adrian Newey wouldn't have been able to fix Red Bull's issues right now. That is what Cristiano Ronaldo at Red Bull seems to think. But Christian, I don't agree, mate. This is why. So I picked up an article this week from Autosport by John Noble, and in it he talks about the reasons why Red Bull are struggling at the moment. And there's a lot of quotes in it from Christian Horner trying to explain sort of why that happened. One of the biggest things that he is asked is, could it be because Adrian Newey is now no longer in the team? And on the face of it, there is a little bit of a coincidence there, isn't there? That the team were doing absolutely brilliantly up until Miami, then they lost that race. And even in Imola, when they won again, actually they were on the back foot. And arguably, if Oscar Piastri had been on pole, McLaren would have won that race. So let's just have a little look at what Horner said. In answer to the question, could all of the issues that Red Bull are having right now, could they have been avoided if Adrian Newey was still there? He said this: we would have had all of these issues because the issues were already there. And one man's input can never be so dramatic so quickly. Okay, I want to try and break down a little bit of what he said, but I want to answer that first. Well, it does seem a little bit coincidental that literally on the weekend that Adrian Newey steps back from active duty in the Red Bull technical team, McLaren are suddenly the team that are in the ascendancy, and Red Bull are heading back down the grid. Now, I can understand that perhaps those issues were there and that they were being masked by the fact that the car was so competitive in 2023, because that is something that Horner talks about as well, that the issues that they're having right now were there, visible in a slightly different way, but masked in 2023 because the car was so dominant. But that Newey hadn't fixed those issues and therefore wouldn't necessarily be able to fix those issues now. And it's all down to the team to do it. Now, I find that a little bit difficult to believe because there seems to be a little bit of confusion in the way that this is messaged. Because earlier in the season, not even at the point that Adrian Newey left Red Bull, even before that, Horner and the rest of the technical team were trying to play down Adrian Newey's involvement, trying to say that actually he's just a consultant, really. There's a technical team headed by Pierre Vacher, he does all the work, and Newey's kind of there in the background. Now, I think that that had a major part in pushing Adrian Newey out the door, alongside all of the controversy that was happening within that team at the beginning of the season. The fact that credit was being taken away from him and being given to this new team. Understandably, Adrian Newey is 65 years old and probably towards the end of his career, but he doesn't want to be told that. He doesn't want to be told that this absolute monster, in a good way, that has been created for this ground effects rule set, that he hadn't little to nothing to do with it. Obviously, he's going to be annoyed by that. But the fact that that messaging was put out there earlier, and now Christian Horner says, oh, well, the issues were there even when he was there. So maybe it was his fault. The issues were there. He couldn't fix them then, could he? So can't fix them now. That side of things doesn't really make sense to me. And actually, if you look at this article a bit further, one of the things that they talk about is perhaps Red Bull were a little bit too ambitious in the way that they approached this season. Now, you'll remember that at the beginning of the season, we were all wowed by the massive gun turrets and the extra little inlets just behind the headrest in the Red Bull, and the fact that they came out the blocks like that and were winning races left, right, and centre. The first 7 races in a row, we all thought they'd absolutely hit the nail on the head, but in this article, Christian Horner suggests that perhaps they were a little bit too extreme. And you look at the way that McLaren have brought their car on this season, it's much more of an evolution of last year. Now, if you look back at Adrian Newey's track record when it comes to developing a concept, he'll come out the blocks at the beginning of a rule set with a car that is revolutionary. It looks completely different often to everybody else. And if you look at 2009, it was a classic example. Although the Red Bull RB5 didn't have a double diffuser, the way it was constructed with the V-shaped chassis at the front was something that has ultimately been copied by everybody else on the grid since then. It's been the template for cars ever since. And yet, from 2009 up until the end of that rule set in 2013, 2014, he just gradually evolved the car. It's the same thing that he did back in the 90s in his Williams era, in fact, into his McLaren era as well, where he just carried over some of the concepts that he'd learned in Williams and just essentially very, very slowly evolved the car. This idea of a massive revolution in the middle of a rule set is not an Adrian Newey move. And it just seems so out of character. And it's more in line with what Horner was saying at the beginning of the season, that actually it's not Adrian Newey that's in charge of this design, and that this car is actually being designed by the rest of the team. I can believe that now because it is a very revolutionary car and it's not the kind of thing that Adrian Newey would have done, and it has bitten them in the backside right now. The other item to talk about here is wind tunnel correlation. Now, I made a big deal about this when it came to Mercedes earlier on in the season, that I couldn't believe that Mercedes of all teams were struggling with wind tunnel correlation. But now it seems like Red Bull are having the same problem as well. It's again, just it just blows my mind that Red Bull are having this problem. But perhaps it speaks to the fact that actually in this rule set, it's really easy to let your simulation tools trick you into thinking that you've got masses of downforce, but then you take it to the track and actually it doesn't translate and you end up with bouncing, or you end up with massive understeer, or you end up with a loose rear end, but it doesn't fit and you don't get the pace out of it that you're expecting to get. Now that's hit Mercedes, it's hit Ferrari, it's now hit Red Bull. And I think there's probably a cautionary tale in here for McLaren as well, that as quickly as you can be up the front, as soon as your tools tell you that you've got more downforce on the table that you aren't accessing, and you're sort of struggling for what to do with your next update, this is what can happen to you. So just as an aside, I definitely think that what we've been saying up until now, that McLaren have to take this opportunity that they have this season and absolutely capitalize on it, is really important, because if they don't do that, then you don't know what happens next season. As soon as they stick another upgrade on it that tries to put more downforce on the car, they may well end up with correlation issues. All right, tangent over. But what I do want to say is Adrian Newey and correlation issues do not go together. In fact, this is not even the first time that Red Bull have had correlation issues. If we go back to 2017, they found that when the cars became wider, their car didn't quite fit within their wind tunnel and they were getting dodgy readings. And you remember that season with the RB13, 13 is always an unlucky number when it comes to Formula One cars, the car didn't work. And guess who wasn't around? Guess who was off doing America's Cup that year? Yeah, that's right, Adrian Newey. But guess who they got back in to try and fix their correlation issues? Yeah, that's right, Adrian freaking Newey. Because the one constant in all of this is that when you want success, when you have success, it's because you've got Adrian Newey. So, Christian, in conclusion, I don't believe you, mate. I just do not believe what you're saying. You cannot say that the car had issues because Adrian Newey put those issues in the car. And now that he's gone, he wouldn't be able to fix them because you've got correlation issues. Because in each of those instances, when there's been correlation issues, he's fixed them. When someone said, let's do a revolutionary car in the middle of a rule set, he said, no, don't do that. Just be evolutionary. And it's paid dividends. I think we are seeing the decline, the massive decline of Red Bull in an era because they don't have Adrian Newey. Perhaps it's just a decline back into the clutches of everybody else. Maybe it's worse than that. But whoever gets Adrian Newey next, and it looks like it's going to be Aston Martin, stay tuned for that announcement. They are going to have some gold dust on their hands. I look forward to seeing what happens in 2026. But right now, Red Bull have got a big issue, and Adrian Newey can no longer be their solution. As usual, if you like what we're doing here, please like, please subscribe, please leave us a comment. We read all of them and we respond to as many as we possibly can. I will see you guys in the next one.